In video number 2, we're looking at terminology related to surveys and questionnaires. You are going to be creating your own surveys this unit, so it is important to understand the different sampling techniques and how to come up with a representative sample. So representative sample refers to a sample that is typical of the entire population. So oftentimes, the entire population is much too big to survey everyone, so you choose a sample to survey. That sample needs to represent the population accurately. So if the sample is not representative, it is biased, and the survey results are going to be invalid. Next, we're talking about sample size. In a survey, sample size can affect results. You want the biggest sample that you can collect, because the bigger the sample, the more accurate that it's going to be. So if the sample is too small, the survey results may not be reliable. However, if it's too large, the survey may be costly and it's just too difficult to conduct. So we're going to start with random sampling techniques. So these 4 techniques that we're going to talk about are all random, meaning that each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So the first type of random sampling is, or random technique is called random sampling. And that's just simply drawing names out of a hat. People are just picked randomly. So, or people or members of the population. It doesn't necessarily have to be people. Stratified sampling is when the population is grouped and a few individuals are picked from each group. So you might organize individuals into different categories and make sure that you have people from each category. Cluster sampling is when you arrange the population into random groups and you choose one of those groups. And lastly, we have systematic sampling, where basically you decide on a number and every, let's say, 3rd individual is selected or every 10th individual is selected. Okay, so you choose a number and choose individuals that way. Then we have non-random techniques. And non-random techniques you have to be careful with because they do not always provide a representative sample. Okay, they can often lead to bias because they are not random. So our first example of that is convenience sampling. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is convenient. So any individual that is easy to sample, you survey or you sample. Although it's convenient, it's not always representative of the population. Then we have judgment sampling. So this is when whoever's conducting the survey decides who they think represents the population. So again, definitely bias there. Volunteer sampling is when people choose to participate. They choose to take the survey or be there. And again, that could be a certain type of participant, so that could lead to bias as well. So we're going to look at an example here. So we have a town that has a population of 20,000 people. The town council conducts a vote at a public meeting about constructing a new ice hockey rink. So 50 people attend the meeting, and 40 of the people at the meeting vote in favor. So 40 vote in favor. So the council says we're going to build the hockey rink since 80% of the people support that decision. So what percent of the people at the meeting voted for the rink? So 40, we said, out of 50. So if we take 40, divide by 50, multiply by 100, that's 80% voted for the rink. What percent of the people in the town actually attended the meeting? So up here, we said that the town has a population of 20,000 people, but only 50 of those 20,000 people showed up to the meeting. So 50 out of 20,000 times 100 is 0.25%. So not a very good representation of the population. So it's asking, is a sample representative? Justify your answer. So as we said before, no, because less than 1% of the population actually came. But also, the people who decided to be there, they chose to be there. So volunteer only. Most likely going to be hockey fans as well if they're going to a meeting about constructing an ice rink. So because it's volunteer and only hockey fans showed, it's another reason why the sample is not representative. On page number 2, we're looking at bias in surveys. So what bias means is it occurs when the results of a survey do not reflect the entire population. Whoops. And there's a variety of different ways that that can happen. We're going to talk about that in a second. So you could have biased questions that restrict people's choices or use words that might influence their response. So it might influence them to answer in a certain way. For results to be valid, a survey must be unbiased. Okay. There's different types of bias. We're going to go through each one. So the first one is leading questions. So when the survey includes questions that begin with maybe information, some sort of information, to elicit or cause people to choose a specific response. Okay, so there might be some information at the beginning that encourages them to choose a certain answer. There's also loaded questions, which have suggested options. So like a multiple choice question where the answer that someone may want to choose isn't there, so they're forced to choose a different option. We have response bias when people intentionally lie or give false information. So some surveys will lead people to want to lie. Okay, and that's the response, that's the issue. And then there's non-response bias when people fail to respond to one or more questions. So that's exactly what it sounds like, non-response. They don't respond, and that creates bias. And then there's sampling bias when you have a non-representative sample, which we talked about on page 1. People walking by in the mall were asked, "We harm the planet when we use pesticides on our lawns. Should the government ban all residential pesticide use?" So, is this survey going to be valid? No, I would argue that there is bias and that it is not going to be valid. What type of bias is it? It is definitely a leading question or a leading bias because before they ask the question, which is, should the government ban all residential pesticide use, they first tell you a negative thing about pesticides. Okay, so they're leading you to answer a certain way by giving you information. How could the survey be improved? Definitely by removing the first line, so that unnecessary information. And they could also ask anonymously. Rather than asking them out loud, they could make it a written response to allow people to feel like they can say what they really feel rather than pleasing somebody. So we have about 4,000 people visited a large sports equipment store during its annual sale. The store surveyed 100 customers after they paid for their purchases. An employee recorded their answers here. This is the survey. So why are the survey results invalid and how could they be improved? So first of all, is the sample size large enough? There were 4,000 people that visited, so that's the population, and our sample size was only 100 customers. So 100 out of 4,000 is only 2.5%, which I would say is too small. You want to aim for approximately 10%. That would be a good sample. Is the sample representative? Does it accurately represent everybody that was there? I would disagree. I would say no, it does not represent the population because it only asked people who bought something, right? Not everyone that bought something. So only asked purchasers. But they did use systematic sampling and by asking every 10th person. That is one of our random sampling techniques. Okay. Are the survey questions unbiased? So if we take a look, the survey questions are here. So the first one says, good sports equipment can greatly improve performance. How much do you spend on equipment each year? So they definitely lead with information that encourages you to possibly lie. So I would say no encourages people to exaggerate with that unnecessary information at the beginning. Okay, and then the second one, how much do you earn per year? Again, encourages people to exaggerate with these ranges too. And D, was the collection method appropriate? So what they did was they had employees record the answers and ask these questions. So having an employee ask you could be intimidating. It might be better to ask anonymously on paper. So that's it. I hope that was a lot shorter than the first one. Your homework is here and you will work on that tomorrow during class.